Good morning. Thanks for waving. That was nice. I appreciate that. To remind, I do exist. I did speak. Thank you. See, I remember a few months ago, I was the new guy. I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Now it's like somebody's talking, I think. It's very good to gather again. We are in person still. We made it through a year, staying on campus, staying face to face. That is a testament to this community, that people took seriously, that together we could be in this position, and only together, only collectively. And we're in a world where we're not really good at collective action right now, and we're not really good at embracing and creating public goods. I think it speaks volumes about the nature of this community that we were able to achieve a high level of vaccination, a high level of use of masks, people respecting the rules that were put in place, and as a result, we got through without interruptions. You'll note that not every place had the same experience, right? There still were the up and downs, there still were the outbreaks and so on, not just in the world, but on college campuses. And so I think it's a remarkable thing to be proud of. I'll preempt probably a question, which is to say, well, when are we going to be done? When are we going to be done with this? Because I know it's on people's minds, and it's something we've been looking at, trying to follow the numbers, see when it makes sense from a safety point of view and the confidence that we can maintain what we've had going point of view. That's the way to make the decision, not because a judge issues an order, to put it in the context of current events. And we had been looking at it, and maybe had been on the direction of making a change, but as people probably know, the numbers actually have reversed. I'm getting a nod from Patricia, thank you. The numbers have reversed, not just generally, but in our area. And some people might have seen that in Philadelphia, they took away the indoor masking order and then put it back. Some of the universities did that. Georgetown had the order taken off, put it back. I don't want to do that. I think that that's one of the things that's frustrated people over the last couple of years is the flip-flopping. Whether it's well-reasoned or not, I think it's frustrating people. So for the time being, I'm going to stick with what we're doing. It's working for us, and I think we should stay where we are. Anyway, this has been I think an active year. Obviously, it's been drinking from a fire hose for me, but I finally know the names of most of the buildings. I know my way around. I'm getting to know a lot of you. I've got great opportunities to meet with students, which has been a joy, and to participate in some of the campus activities, which is like the best thing about being a university, is that you're surrounded by amazing events. Students performing, faculty organizing, great opportunities for students to hear from different people from the world, athletics, performances. It's just fantastic. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm in higher education. I couldn't be more thrilled. Here's what I want to do today. I gave a presentation a few days ago in this room for the trustees meeting where we talked about tuition with the students, and I gave sort of an overview of the university budget. Got good feedback on that in the sense that it was a level of explanation and transparency that people appreciated, and so I thought I'd do a kind of truncated version of that. I'm not gonna give you the full deal because I do have the tendency to go on a bit. No, it's true. I know that's shocking. So I want to do a version of that, and then I basically want to let the agenda be guided by questions, comments, things that people want to hear about. So let me just jump in on that. I don't know if those are visible. Are we using the big one or just it's getting warmed up? There it goes. So I start with this because we're going to talk about budget pressure and the squeeze that Montclair State University is under. But what impresses me about this university is that notwithstanding the financial difficulties of keeping a large public research university operating, And notwithstanding, we'll talk a little bit about this, sort of the differential funding of institutions in New Jersey, that has had zero effect on our commitment to excellence. And in many ways, including these highlights that are up there, but to my mind, most importantly, from a student success point of view, we are outperforming our peers, many of whom receive a higher state investment than we do. That's not the main story. The story is the excellence part. And I want to keep that as the focus. Oh, this is not, I don't know if this is the most recent version, but anyway, I can skip through. I deleted a bunch to make it shorter. So in the context of the tuition hearing, just so people have this, it's really an important, proper thing that we keep our tuition low out of respect for our students. And this shows the annual increases in tuition over the last several years. And I think this is something to be incredibly proud of, right? Because it's a commitment to affordability that quite frankly is necessary if you're going to claim to be an institution that's about accessibility. It puts us at the low end relative to our New Jersey peers. And again, I would point out with a great deal of pride and compliments to everybody in this room, much more than I had anything to do with it, that the numbers in terms of cost don't correlate with the numbers in terms of quality or student success, which I think is a critical thing. It's true at the graduate level as it is at the undergraduate level. Now, I'm not saying that this necessarily should be the case, but it is the case, and so it's something that we have to think about. But here's why this is so important. The graduation rate is not purely a function of tuition. Obviously, if that were true, you would see a one-to-one relationship, and you don't. But it is worth pointing out that by keeping the financial burden as modest as we humanly can, we do make it easier for students to succeed, and it is part of the commitment to making underrepresented students find a place of success at this university. It is why I believe our enrollments are going up while other universities are struggling, right? People look at this. They want to know, where will I succeed? Where will my son, my daughter, my cousin, my loved one, where will they find success? It's a huge financial investment. It's a huge investment of time. People are keenly aware that the likelihood of success is not the same at every institution. The budget is driven by tuition and fees, right? This is a critical point as we think about this question of how the university stays afloat. This is a different thing, right? If we were looking at this pie chart 35 years ago, it would be totally different, right? Essentially the green and the blue would be flip-flopped, probably, and then some. And if you want to see it in a different way, again, this is not as far back as I just said. This is 2006. But what's interesting, yes, the budget of the university has gone up, not surprising. The part that you want to pay attention to is the proportions, right? And while once upon a time, in 2006, the blue, which is the amount of the budget that came from tuition and fees, was a little bit more than the red and the green, which is the two forms of state investment in the institution. It was roughly even, right? Obviously, that's changed dramatically. And as many of you know, if we'd gone back further, the bar would have looked completely different. It is worth noting, although I don't want it to be the point of emphasis in this discussion, it is worth noting that our students are funded at a different level than students at other universities. It's not a new thing. People say, oh, it's the politics of the last 10, 20 years. It's relevant. But the reality is that when it comes to the appropriations of state dollars in this state, there's no formula. People might assume, well, there's a certain number of dollars that goes depending on what your enrollment is, or there's a certain fixed amount. No, different institutions get different amounts determined by the legislature. We're going to work on that. We're making a concerted effort to change that equation and to say this isn't just a game between universities. This is it's an equity issue. It's how students at different institutions are funded, and quite frankly, what populations are benefiting and disproportionately not benefiting when you have this sort of inequity in funding across different institutions. It's not about the institutions, it's about the students, and so we're going to work to correct this. But here's the part that I think is impressive, and I think it really is the story that we should be celebrating, and I really want to give all the credit in this story and make people feel a great deal of pride to the people in this room and obviously the colleagues that you all stand for. We are producing, if you think of us as an enterprise, we are producing our primary output, right, which is students earning degrees, at a lower cost than pretty much every institution in the state. This is not a small thing. And by the way, if somebody looked at this, they would say, oh, well, certainly the people in the red bar must be doing a crummy job. That must be an inferior product compared to the people who are spending more. Well, I would put it to you that that's not only not true, that if we were to array this in terms of quality and outcomes, we would be on the left side. And the money is not driving it. Now, there's a little nuance to this, right? You know, you've got universities that have, you've got Rutgers, obviously, at the left. They've got a massive research enterprise. They've got a massive medical enterprise. They're spending more money. That all gets complicated, right? So I don't want to be overly simplistic about it. But this is an impressive achievement. How is that possible, right? So this is the question. How is that possible? How does Montclair State University produce at a higher level? And by the way, if you want to take one of the most important bottom line measures, every university in some sense you can predict what their graduation rate would be based on the demographics of their student body. So the most important variable, if I took a student who's entering college and you wanted to assign a probability of that student graduating, what do you think the most important predictive variable is? It is family income. So a lot of people would say, well, grades, right? A good student is more likely to graduate. No. Family income is a better predictor of graduation than grades for whether somebody's graduate. So you could come up with, in some sense, a predicted graduation rate for every university based on what the student population is. And you could refine that with different levels of nuance. Predicted graduation rate for our university would be around 49%. Something like that. 50%. That's what you'd expect given the population that we serve. We're coming in at something on the order of 67%. That differential, by the way, and again, it's some nuance, and I've talked to some people who've studied this, the differential between the expected outcome for our students and what we achieve is the highest differential in the country. Seriously. I have the study in my hands. It's not published yet, so I'm excited. I keep writing to the author, like, when is this coming out? Because he doesn't want me to go public with it. But that is something to be incredibly proud of, right? And now how do we do that? In part because everybody is doing an incredible amount. We have a lean organization, right? A relatively small percentage of our budget, about 14% or less, is going to what you might think of as the administrative overhead. And quite frankly, the number of employees we have per student is lower than pretty much any other university in New Jersey. So that's something to be proud of, yes, in a way, but also means people are working really hard, right? And I want to recognize that, right? Like, that's achieved because we're asking a lot of everybody here, and people are doing it because they're focused on the mission, right? Because people believe in what we're doing. They believe in the role that we're playing, educating people who don't necessarily find success at other institutions, and they think that the job that they're doing is important, because it is. But I also want to be clear to recognize that everybody's carrying that weight of making this enterprise work at an incredible level of efficiency. And so when we're making the argument for greater state investment. And I'll talk a little about some of the things that we're doing to try and increase the robustness of this institution, I think, in answer to the questions. We're doing that because I recognize, like, we need help. You all need help, right? We can't continue to increase scale and to squeeze ever more from the stone, right? It's gotta be recognized in state investment, and we've got to build an enterprise that's more robust to make sure that we are at the right size of capacity to keep achieving the outcomes that we've achieved, and quite frankly, to do better. Because after all, I'm a glass half full kind of guy, right? So yes, 67%, 68% is pretty good, but it still means that a third of the people that start here don't earn a degree. Well, that's not okay, right? So I'm proud to be at the head of the class, but from an objective point of view, that's not okay. As I talk about, one of the reasons why people are so frustrated with higher education is because the majority of people in America who went to college don't have a degree. We took them in, we said, come here, study, work hard, and you'll get a degree, and then they left in debt and frustrated and feeling bad about themselves. So 2/3 is good, 80% is better, 90% is better than that. So we're going to keep working for it, but that requires help. And the world has changed, right? Our students say, we need more mental health counselors. We need more psychological support services. Like, okay, where's that going to come from? And by the way, we've tried. The hard part is hiring people. You all know that in this current environment, it's pretty hard to hire people even when you do create the positions. So this is a challenging moment. And we're working hard. We're working hard to build a more robust university that's going to continue to have those results and honor the work that you are all doing to get us to where we are. I see our opportunities as being remarkable. A lot of people are sort of bemoaning the state of affairs in higher education. Many of you may have said, "Oh, there's a demographic cliff. Oh my God, nobody's going to college anymore." Yeah. We have more people signed up for our admitted students weekend than we'd had, what was it, Wendy, 17% more? I don't know if Wendy's here. Something like that? 17% more. We had the largest freshman class in the history of the university this year. We're on track to probably better that for the coming year. People are going to college. They're just being a little bit more discriminating about where it makes sense to go and what's the right path for them. So as long as we are offering something that other people are not, quality, experience, positive outcomes, we are going to thrive. And I believe that 100%. So as I said, the important part from my point of view, and we'll talk about all these things, I think, in conversation, so I'm not going to read from a PowerPoint slide. The important part from my point of view is that whatever budget pressures we face, that's a separate conversation from what our substantive ambitions are. Right? Yes, it has some effect on what we can and cannot do, but we will continue to push in terms of greater achievements in academic success. We will continue to grow the research enterprise. You've heard me talk about public service. We have some good traction on that. We will expand the opportunities for public service. I believe that is destined to be a signature of our university. And I will have opportunity to talk about what we mean by Montclair Unbound. That is part of the enterprise response, but it's also about meeting students where they are, increasing our flexibility, increasing our nimbleness, offering degrees in novel ways that meet learners where they want to be met, which increasingly is not 100% in a classroom, learning the same way people learned, 50 years ago. From a budgetary point of view, we do have some priorities. We likely will raise tuition, but we will not radically pivot from our expectation of creating an affordable university. We will continue to grow the faculty and grow the staff, as I talked about. You all know that we have to meet our obligations. As I said to the students, because it's an honest thing, we have a 3% increase, but of course inflation is greater than that. So we recognize the challenge, and inflation affects the university. So we're going to do everything in our power to put ourselves in a position to respond to the times that we live in. And of course, the second to last point there, we will continue to work hard to rectify the budget situation, but just to show how challenging it is, President Cole worked hard to equalize the funding last year. There was a $10 million increase that was supposed to be permanent that got pulled out of the budget. So we're fighting to get back what was hard-fought victory last year, and so we're sort of behind where we expected to be, just to give you a sense of what that actually is. We will continue to launch new programs, push the frontiers of what we do as a university. Very exciting to see this. Very exciting to see this progress happening. Some really interesting initiatives underway, both from an implementation point of view, but also in the planning stages, which hopefully have an opportunity to talk about. And we're not going to continue our charge forward. You know, we achieved R2 status, and we're going to continue to work on that. I think the opportunity is to integrate our research program with our service in the community. And so there's almost an endless list of possibilities of how we can do that, and maybe we'll get into that in conversation. Even if we raise tuition, our commitment to financial assistance is going to increase. Right? So a significant part of the budget, right? If you look at our total budget, more than 5% of our expenditures are on financial aid to our students. That likely will increase in the coming year and beyond. That's how we will make higher education affordable. And as I said, students are finding their way here. As you can see, the growing freshman class is the black line. Students are finding their way here because of what they're seeing they will get at Montclair, a top education with a student focus, and it's something that you all have done an incredible job of creating and delivering year after year, and it's known in the world. So I think that was the last one. So let me just stop there and see what is on your minds. I'd rather be directly responsive to questions than drone on. Hopefully that's a little bit of an overview, and I can fill in from there. Yes, sir.
The situation at Bloomfield College?
Sure. So just give a little background. Really interesting. I was there actually. I was actually just there yesterday afternoon, meeting with Bloomfield students. So the quick background for those of you who don't know, Bloomfield College, an interesting institution, private college. It is technically associated with actually the Presbyterian Church, although that hasn't had any meaning for quite some time. It is the only predominantly black institution in New Jersey, and it has a majority-minority population. 2/3 of its student body is a Pell-eligible population, majority first-generation college student. In the fall, the president of Bloomfield, Marquita Evans, made the unusual but I think highly admirable decision to publicly say, hey, you know, we are in jeopardy of closing. The business model was unstable to begin with, and COVID slammed them from an enrollment point of view, and it just put their future in jeopardy. And they basically said, we are open to ideas from people who are interested in helping us in the next phase, and creative ideas. And so I had already met Dr. Evans and reached out to her, and we began talking about how Montclair might partner with, collaborate with Bloomfield to ensure that they had a prosperous future. From my point of view, as a public serving institution committed to student success, particularly an inclusive model that creates pathways for students who are often marginalized and poorly served by higher education, for us, with that mission to watch Bloomfield College, a minority-serving institution that has had a good track record and is reaching students that other institutions do not reach, for us to just watch there and say, oh, well, that's a shame. That just seemed unacceptable. It's unacceptable to me. So the question was, could we come up with a solution which would ensure a future for Bloomfield and see that institution achieve its mission, but not harm our institution as a baseline, but more importantly, help our institution achieve its mission and indeed put us in a position to thrive in the years ahead. So that's what we said about finding a design that would do that. And we're in the process. So the announcement that you saw, what is it now, a month ago? About? The announcement that you saw a month ago was an interim financial support agreement. And the purpose of that agreement was to essentially create a line of credit for Bloomfield College so that this highly problematic, but in some sense artificial cash crunch that they had coming into this year wouldn't force them to close, right? And to get, I mean, a little bit in the weeds, right? They had enough money to operate, but because they had to set aside a reserve to pay the costs if they were to close, the board said, well, putting that reserve aside, we don't actually know if we have enough money to make it through the year. But that was sort of artificial because it was only because they were holding the money in case they were to close it. If they knew they didn't have to, anyway, right, you get it? So we basically stepped in and said, we have your back. In case you need money to get through the year, we will backstop you in some sense. That's a secured loan, right? So just like any other mortgage, right, there's property that's assigned to it. So in my opinion, hopefully, highly unlikely event that Bloomfield does end up saying, and we can't figure out something, we're a secured creditor. So I consider this a very low risk to our institution, and the state is investing in the same way, right? They are essentially making an investment in Bloomfield College. Why? To create a window of opportunity for us to design something new. And so the something new is, what if we had a liberal arts college, Bloomfield, which offers a differentiated model to see students achieve their potential, to reach populations that are typically underrepresented in higher education. What if we created that and embedded that within a large public research university? And so now you're going to create something that's more sustainable from my financial point of view. There are economies of scale, economies of scope, and there's access to a whole range of resources that the students at Bloomfield don't currently have. And by the way, the students at Montclair have access to resources at Bloomfield and opportunities at Bloomfield that they don't currently have. So that's what we're now in this sort of second phase. Like, what would a design like that look like? And so part of it is sort of legal, structural, what is this thing? Is it two separate things? Is it one thing? Is it a bunch of contracts? And we have to figure out what's the most advantageous version of that. And then there are going to be a whole bunch of logistical questions, right? How do the different pieces plug together? You know, accreditation and different departments that have similar orientation. So we got to solve athletics. There's a whole bunch of different things out there, and so that's our summer project. is to figure that out. We're going to engage outside help to work through that. There obviously will be opportunities for participation as we get more into the programmatic design phase. There'll be opportunities for participation in that process. Again, what programs stay, what don't, how does it link to our program? Like, there's a whole bunch that needs to happen, and we're in that. But I think that it's been a real positive. I can tell you that the reaction in the community to our behavior, right, that we sort of stepped up and said we're not willing to let this happen, is enormously positive. There's an appreciation that we take our public responsibility seriously and our mission seriously, and people see it as such. So I think it's a huge win. What I've said is the students at Montclair State University are not going to pay for the rescue of Bloomfield College, right? I said that to our students, and I've said that that's not how this is going to work. Ultimately, I believe this is going to be helpful, not harmful, in terms of the financial challenge. It's going to create a new way of engaging students, a new way of engaging the community. It ultimately will be a platform for us to offer maybe graduate programs, maybe non-degree programs in a different part of the community. I don't know how many of you have been around Bloomfield College. It's a happening part of the area. I mean, there's a huge amount of development going on there. There's a huge amount of activity. It's in the community in a way that, as beautiful as our campus is not, right, in the fabric of the community. So I think it's going to offer an exciting opportunity, and I hope that we work something out that will actually enhance the enterprise and help us achieve our mission. Any other questions about Bloomfield? We'll try and be thematic on this. Because if there is, we can do that. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, we've got microphone. Oh, okay, sorry.
Hi, I was wondering, Marilyn Davis, Center of Pedagogy. I was wondering if you could share your thoughts on dual credit and college credit for our high school students that live out in the community.
Well, I'm in favor of it. I think that there are, so the question was about dual enrollment programs where students in high school can earn college credit, which I think that this is part of our being flexible, right? Which is offering different pathways for students to find their way to college. So dual enrollment, I think, is one of those tools. First of all, to help students from an affordability point of view, right? If you can earn some credits while you're in high school, I think that's useful. To me, the most important part is it creates a level of comfort in a student's mind with the idea of going to college, and it sort of says, well, I've sort of started already, so maybe I could just go. And so I think that's a powerful thing, and I think there's innovations happening. Actually, my old university, ASU, did a thing this year which I thought was quite interesting, where they sent admissions letters to every student starting high school in Phoenix. They admitted them to ASU and said, you are admitted as long as you do X, Y, and Z. Same sort of related idea, like how do we make people comfortable with the idea that they're going to go to college? So I think that's useful. I think that the question I have with dual enrollment, and we're building pathways with community colleges, and hopefully we'll get into that as a separate discussion point. The question I always have is, are you unintentionally, right, with a good mindset, by creating these ways for people to earn college degrees, credits, in different venues, are you inadvertently depriving some people of the college experience, right? So that would be my only hesitation, which would be, well, how many credits can you earn that way? And are you doing it in such a way that you still are encouraging the student to come to college and to build on that, rather than it becoming an alternative or a less than way of some people, right, earn their degrees that way, and that's good enough for them, but the other students are going to come to campus. So I would just want to make sure that it's seen as a tool to draw people in and give them a higher level of confidence about attending college, rather than creating an alternative pathway that doesn't offer the full range of experience that I think being part of this college community does. So now I'm looking for the other microphones. There you go.
Hi, yes, my name is Rakai Lash. I work in residence life. So I appreciate what you said about the mask mandate and the numbers not being steady. But I guess my question is faculty and staff, like, satisfaction being included in that consideration, like in the conversation? So for those of us who are on the front lines and work with students directly every day and are not in offices with minimal student engagement, our buildings, maybe our classrooms, I don't want to speak for faculty, are becoming less welcoming. The students are not as happy. It's affecting our engagement and how they look at us. And so I just wanted to know if that's being considered, and, you know, if the mask mandate is not changing, if that's going to be communicated to students so they know who it comes from, because I think that's important too. When we're, you know, we have to wear your mask, still you have to wear your mask, but maybe they have friends at other universities where the mask mandate has been lifted, to know that these are not decisions that we're making, but that we're enforcing, because that affects our relationship and then how they view us and then how we do our jobs.
That's a great question. So first of all, it definitely is in consideration, right? We have a health advisory team that's bringing up the health part, but we also talk about the social and the interaction impact, exactly as you described. And I've talked about it with the students themselves, about how they feel about interacting with people in a masked way as opposed to an unmasked way, and how that negatively affects the environment. The thing that's interesting, and I was just with a group of students that we've organized. Vice President Souflaris organized. We call it the Cauldron, President's Cauldron. It's a group of students. By the way, you want to know why we call it the President's Cauldron? I'll give you a secret. Since it's a small, intimate group, I'll tell you a secret. So we were trying to think of a name for this group, And Dawn said, well, it's the 40, because she used 40. And I said, well, what if we want it to be bigger than 40? I don't want to call it the 40, then it's mislabeling. So I was thinking about a good name, and I was thinking about, like, well, what's a group of hawks called? You know, like you've got like a murder of crows and a pride of lions. I was like, what's a group of hawks? And so I looked it up, and it's a kettle of hawks. I was like, a kettle. But then I looked at it, I kept Googling, right? So that's the good thing about Google. If you keep looking, you find something you like. It turns out it's also called a cauldron of hawks. And I was like, well, that sounds cool. So I was meeting with the cauldron the other day, and I was actually surprised at how large a percentage of the group said, please don't remove the mask requirement, because we think it will adversely affect interaction on campus, because then I won't know who to trust and who not to trust. And we think that the people who don't wear masks are going to be the very people who I want to wear masks, because they're going to be behaving unsafely. And so their view was that the interaction on campus would be worse without a mask requirement, because everybody would be more nervous. And while there are some people who don't love wearing masks, it creates a level of comfort being together and gathering, which I must say, I was not expecting that. Not only as that somebody would say it, but a lot of people said it. I'm looking at Marjorie; she's nodding. Wasn't it somewhat surprising? Yeah. So you're 100% on the right question, right? Which is, how does this affect us from a social point of view, not just from a public health point of view? But even that is, I think, ambiguous. Now, your point about communicating why we're doing what we're doing, I think, like a lot of other things, COVID-related, we get tired and we stop, being attentive to that. So I think you're right. We should be more communicative about, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, and so people understand where we're coming from and what we're doing. By the way, since you're in residence life, you obviously are familiar with what I'm about to say, but not everybody is. We changed the vaccination implementation with respect to students living on campus. We had been so the policy at the university is that in order to live on campus, you have to be vaccinated. That's the policy. That's the policy, and it has been for some time. We did allow for exemptions based on medical and religious waivers that some people have. We decided, and this has been talked about in a kind of misleading way, so that's why I want to take the opportunity of your question to address it. We decided to no longer allow the exemption based on the religious waiver. It affected 69 students. And the reason we did it is directly on point to your question. That's why I want to talk about it. The reason we did it was that because we were allowing a small but non-trivial number of unvaccinated students to live in the residence halls, we felt from a safety point of view we had to restrict sort of normal behavior, not having guests, not having students gathering, and this came up in the student discussion also, it was introducing some friction into the residential life. Are people following the mandates? Are they not? And so we felt that that was placing a huge burden on the vast, vast majority of students who were living on campus, that they couldn't sort of live a normal campus life, right? And it was harming their interactions. And so for a very small number of people. And so we decided, and we checked that legally, this is not a denial of religious liberty. It's not discrimination. It was creating a huge financial burden on the university. We were keeping spaces vacant. We were holding rooms in quarantine. It was having a lot of negative impacts. And we expect that we're going to need those rooms because we have a large group of students coming in. So it just didn't make sense. And so we made the calculation in some ways in the other direction in that case to embrace sort of normal campus life over that policy. So we're always trying to find that balance, but we have to communicate it and be attentive to it. So thank you for that reminder. Other things. So I'm looking over at the self-segregated peanut gallery over here. I don't know why they're scared of you, so they're all sitting together in case something goes bad. I'm going to come to you in a second. All right, Keith is taking the blame. But I wanted to take the opportunity to, Junice, would you maybe come up for a second so everybody can see you? So probably one of the most exciting things to happen this year is that we have a new university provost. And it's funny because when I was coming to Montclair, I told people, you know, I already know what the biggest decision I'm going to have to make in the coming years, and what the biggest implication, the decision with the biggest implications is going to be who I'm able to get to come and choose to be our university provost. And I will say to you, with great humility, I freaking nailed this one. So Junius Gonzalez comes with a, you know, incredibly impressive history and pedigree, experience in leadership in higher ed. He's been a provost, most immediately at NYT, was provost of the North Carolina system, interim president there for a period, so he's not impressed with rough and tumble New Jersey politics. He has survived North Carolina, and was provost at the University of Texas, El Paso, an institution which in many ways is a role model for us in terms of combining accessibility, academic quality, and growth as a research institution. And he's just somebody who gets what it means to be an institution that cares about students and wants to make a university that is committed to the success of students from a variety of backgrounds. And so I just couldn't be more thrilled that we were able to get Junice to come and join us at Montclair, and I asked him to say a few words since we had an opportunity to gather as a group. Junice?
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity, and those are very nice words. And I'll tell you, you know, several people had called me about the opportunity and learned a little bit about the institution. And precisely because of one of the facts that President Capel mentioned, that is that expected versus actual graduation rates, told me something, right? That something's going on in terms of the students' characteristics and their grit and resilience and all of that. But then obviously something is going on with what I call the Montclair ecosystem. And that is all of you and beyond. So it is exciting. I've been here all of 6 weeks and have formulated the first 120 things that need to get done. But part of it is actually process, and the engagement of all of you. There are a number of things that are going to be rolling out. We've got to pick which of the 120 will be the top 40 to get done in the next year. And they're just fascinating things that I've observed already, and that is, you know, there are wonderful pockets of things going on, let's say for student success, which I'll comment on in a little more detail, and yet, you know, this group doesn't know what that group is doing, and if you have too many things going on, even though they're incredibly well-intentioned and successful, you can't scale anything. You know, you can't take the mini best practice that I may be doing in my office. So one of the first items on the agenda, it'll be announced, but I'll start up in the fall, is really to have a university-wide sort of task force on student success. And part of that is to get everybody on the same page regarding not only what's going on, but what our goals should be. And I also believe that integrating faculty and staff success with student success, that those initiatives are often the most potent. So that is very high on the agenda, and I will tell you and brag, because I do believe in meaningful engagement and giving everybody here extra work. You know, at my previous institution, very similar, much smaller, 48% Pell, 27% white, commuter, lots of first-generation students. The team increased first-year retention pre-COVID by 10 full percentage points, from 71 to 81%, in a very deliberate and intentional way. We increased, as I left, even with COVID, graduation rate 5 full percentage points, okay? And then in a new coaching program that we did for students who were, I hate the phrase at risk, but who had dropped below the GPA required for them to keep their institutional scholarship. We eliminated educational equity gaps for Latinx students and almost closed the gap for African American students. But it was involving faculty and staff and other students and peers. So to me, that's one of the biggest reasons that I'm here. The last thing I'll say is just, when I came here and was asked to give a little talk, which I figure, why not keep repeating myself? So any opportunity I have to talk with the departments, et cetera, I'll give my little talk again. And it really is about next level value for Montclair. And I use the word value in many different ways. One is the institution is undervalued in the market. Okay? The institution is undervalued from a particular sort of PR and marketing perspective. And I've been around enough to know, as President Coppell has, about what is going on at other public R2 institutions and so forth. So I hope that you'll join in these efforts as you hear about them. I'll mention one last thing, but the challenges facing higher ed are really daunting. Okay, I have the list of my favorite 12. And it really will require everybody to be really flexible in how they think about things, right? And how you engage and how you take advantage of, the word co-opetition as opposed to competition. There are many things that other institutions are doing, which certainly we can emulate, and there are many things that we do here that we want to push out as well. But this is a time to really not be afraid. There's a lot of serious stuff going on about, let's say, introductory, for lack of a better phrase, core gen ed courses. So just go look at outlier.org and see what they're offering. Their premise is to have the highest quality faculty, deliver the highest quality content, in particular introductory subjects. $400 for the course. It's sort of mixed modalities. If you do all the work and fail the course, you get your $400 back. And at the same time, if you pass the course, they've already arranged with Pittsburgh to give 3 credits. And certainly, I would hope that we would take the 3 credits from the University of Pittsburgh. So there's a whole amount of long list of things to do, and I'm excited to get to know many of you and hear what you think and how you go from 120 to 40 top priorities for the upcoming year.
Other questions? You can see he's even more of a higher ed nerd than I am, which is great. That's what we need. There were other hands, I remember. But. Go ahead, David.
Okay, so
he's got a pad.
The provost said 120, so I know I only have one thing to ask about. So I was trying to think of all that huge list, right? Because there's so many. So the comment though about fear. So fear is often related to uncertainty and confusion. So you said a little bit about budget and budget uncertainty. So without attributing value to it, I will say there have been rumors about budget cuts or the university's not making its budget. Then you made a comment about the amount being held back. Also, the term responsibility-centered management, or RCM, has been floated around. So I know that's distinct from budget problems, but it also uncertainty. So what I'm asking you to do is to, since you're the reliable source, right, and not rumors, yeah. to give us all good information about where things are, and then just as an adjunct to that, in terms of fear, I would say that at the front line of the university, most of us have experienced close to zero transparency in budget. Like we don't see anything, we don't see ledgers, we don't see counts, we see very little, we get told numbers, but we don't see them. So I would say that's not a question, that's a statement, that one way to reduce fear and uncertainty is to have more transparency. That requires some education because most of us are not experienced at it, so we don't know what to look for. Yep. But we need, if things are going to change, we need educational transparency about the budget. And then my question is about where we are now and asking you to like set straight any misconceptions that are floating out there.
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in transparency, and I appreciate actually where you ended, right, which is that in order to have an intelligent conversation, you have to have a little bit of education going on, and so I'm happy to do that. I started a little bit. Now I didn't go into as much detail as I did at the tuition hearing. Rich was there, and I got into a little more of the weeds on what our budget is made up of, and I'm happy to do that. And maybe we'll even just have a budget. For those of you who are true gluttons for punishment, we will have a budget session where we will really go into explaining how the budget works and what the different points are. So one thing I can start, though, is an easy one, so I'm glad you asked it. We are not adopting responsibility-centered management. So RCM, for those of you who like to read the Chronicle of Higher Ed just for your fun entertainment, RCM has a really specific meaning. It basically means that the university is budgeted by unit, and that essentially the university is a conglomerate, and all costs are distributed to each unit and paid back. So so what an RCM model would mean is that the College of Science and Mathematics would have its own budget, and they would pay for everything separately. Like, we would charge them for their facility, we would charge them for IT, and they would pay the central unit, and then they would sort of eat what they could kill, so to speak, and they wouldn't get any support from the center. And there would be no central initiatives. And so in that world, then you create this sort of Lord of the Flies university, right, where everyone, it's a good name for university, LOFU. But everybody's competing with each other, right? There's no cooperation across units because it's viewed as, everything's viewed as zero sum, right? If you get a student, I'm not getting a student. And a dollar that's going to you is a dollar that's not going to me in a very real and palpable way. We're not going to do that. It's not productive. It's not healthy, and quite frankly, in my opinion, it's not efficient, right? It's supposed to drive efficiency. I don't actually think it does drive efficiency. It drives all kinds of weird dysfunction and hoarding and so on and so forth. What we are moving towards, however, is a model where there is more opportunity for entrepreneurial behavior at the unit level, right? So the way this university currently works is sort of the total opposite of that, right? Everything is central. All resources come centrally, and anything that any unit wants to do is achieved by requesting dollars from the center. Now, maybe your request will be greeted with a yes, but maybe it'll be greeted with a no. And so if I grow a new program and I enroll 1,000 new students, fantastic, and there's a whole bunch of revenue associated with that, fantastic. I don't know from the beginning how much of that will return to me. I can be fairly safe to say, well, some of it will. Or, by the way, it's not only for an academic unit. If I'm in facilities or if I'm in IT and I come up with some cool way to save resources, some more efficient way to do something, maybe a new approach to a problem that is less expensive, I have no certainty that the savings realized will in any percentage flow back to me and allow me, as the leader of my unit, to do something interesting. So the problem with that is, if I don't know what's going to happen for me and my unit and how we're going to benefit, I'm less likely to invest resources in those innovative things, to spend time trying to figure those things out, to encourage people to look for those opportunities, all the things that you need to do to achieve what Junius was just describing, or the model of a university that was there. Why would you take resources and put them into growing a new program if there's no expectation that the resources are going to come back? So that's what we're going to achieve, is a model that creates that structure of return on investment for the university's units. And it's not like we have zero of that, it's just unpredictable, right? And so we want to build a model that's more predictable, that encourages that kind of innovation. That is going to ultimately help with the underlying budget situation. So yeah, I'm perfectly happy to be transparent. The state right now, if you look at the budget that the governor released, We had $10 million less than we thought we were going to have. That's not good. By the way, that's part of the budget education. $10 million less is not good. And while I feel good about the enrollment trend, you see a piece of it there, but you can also see that it's uneven, right? Because first of all, some of our graduate enrollments are down in certain places, and if you go on a head count basis, that's a little deceiving because people can be enrolled and count on a head count basis, and so the number looks high, but if they're not enrolled at the same number of units, the economic implications are not the same. Again, that's not super complex. So from a revenue point of view, we're okay. It'll be up, but it's not going to make up for the $10 million. And the structure of this institution, I think people may like, is we have a built-in increase of salary, right? That's goes up every year. That, by the way, exceeded inflation for many years over the past few years. But so that means that if you increase your revenue, roughly, but if you increase your revenue as an enterprise by 3% every year, assuming no other costs go up, right? You're still just breaking even. That's pretty hard, right? I mean, think about, if I told you I have a business and I'm going to increase revenue every year by 3%, that's a pretty good business. Right? People criticize higher ed for being terrible and inefficient, and it's, oh my God, they're lame. It's like, you show me a business that has done that continuously for 100 whatever years. Like, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. So that's where we are right now, right? We have costs that are going up, and by the way, inflation affects the university, right? We buy stuff too. And we have to figure out from a budgetary point of view where it's going. Now, I'm not just accepting that there's going to be a state budget cut, but it would be totally irresponsible for us as a university to not say, okay, in the worst case scenario, where would you make the cuts in order to survive? We're not going to fold up our tent and say we're going home. So where would we make the adjustments? And so that's what I've asked everybody to do. And I've asked people to do that as an exercise that we hope we don't have to implement, but we have to be ready to do it just in case. And we'll see. And I think we've got pretty creative solutions coming back of how can we do it, with salary savings, with deferring some things, so that the pain is relatively modest in the coming year. But that's where we're at. I don't think this isn't where we were 2 years ago or whatever when we had the significant budget challenges in the middle of COVID. So I don't think there's anything to be afraid of, but I do think that there's a pretty good chance this is going to be a belt-tightening year until some of the things that we're trying to do to increase the robustness of the enterprise start to kick in, which I think is we're looking at the subsequent year. I want to be clear, when you go back to that chart, so I don't know if I can get easily back to the beginning. I don't think so. But if you remember that chart that shows the, oh, here we go. So go to the one that shows the share of the budget that's revenue, that's tuition versus state. Keep going. More. That one. No, keep going down, down, down. Next. Next. That one. So some people look at that and they say, well, that's a terrible story. Right? That's a story of state disinvestment in higher education. There's something to that. I'm not like, you're not crazy, right? That is part of that story. But there's another way to interpret that story. The other way to interpret that story is our destiny is in our own hands. Right? We survive or we fail based on what we do. Right? And if we are performing as an institution of higher education that people want to attend and they're willing to put their hard-earned resources to come here, then we survive. We're not at the mercy of what the legislature does. That's where we want to be. And so, yes, I'm going to fight to make those red and green pieces get bigger. Absolutely. but I hope that they shrink as a share of the total as we have other resources that come in from tuition, from fees, from other activities that we will grow over the years, because that gives us independence and the ability to weather any storm. Yes, sir.
Today's Star Ledger, the headline says that the state has increased higher ed budgets by $100 million. So our share of that $100 million is minus $10 million, right? And you already spoke about how we are lean and everybody here is working hard. So my question is, the campus community has never really been involved in dealing with the state legislature in any sort of way, going to Trenton, testifying. We have some eloquent speakers and some knowledgeable people. What can we do to help convince the legislature that Montclair is a good investment?
So two things. Thank you, Rich. So two things. And first of all, I want to appreciate, as I'm looking at Rich and Mary, I think we are off to a great start in improving the relationship, and David, improving the relationship between the administration and the unions on campus. It's been a real pleasure and terrific indicator of that the question is, how can we work together to better advance the university? That should be our posture generally, right? How do we collaborate to come up with solutions? And this is one of them. So one thing is, in the interest of education, I'm all for the dramatic statement. It's not quite true that our share of the increase in higher ed funding is minus 10. So part of what's happened is that two things have happened. That there's a share of funding that's becoming under the aegis of the Garden State Guarantee. People know basically what that is. So we do get a share of funding. So if you remember that chart that showed the increase in financial aid, that's not all from us. Some of that's from us, but some of that is from some state funding associated with the Garden State Guarantee. And there's some increase in funding to the university under the banner of something called an outcomes-based allocation, which we do pretty well on, because it's recognizing, among other things, how good a job is each university doing of advancing on certain strategic objectives that include underrepresented students getting college degrees. So the minus 10 million was the specific adjustment to the green bar. So if you really want to look at that, you see that the green bar went up and then it went down. The green bar, which is the per student appropriation, which, as I said, President Cole, working with 3 other university presidents, tried to level the disparity in the per student allocation, and that was a one-time. It turned out it wasn't supposed to be. That was an attempt to level it, not to make it 100% even, but to move closer to leveling it. And what was thought to be a permanent adjustment was taken away in the budget this year, so we have to get that back. So it's not true that we are ending up zero. But I think that the answer is absolutely we need to have the faculty and the staff making the case alongside us. And quite frankly, it's more compelling than me. I can make the argument, but if the argument's coming from you and your colleagues in other union leaders and the other members of the union and from our students, and that's why the way I talk about this is very intentional. Nobody cares if Montclair State University is getting less than Rowan University. Nobody cares. Like, get out your violin. That's not a compelling story. One institution whining about how the world is unfair because another institution got more. The reality is, though, our students are getting less than students at another university. Somebody explain to me how that's okay. Right? That a student who happens to go to this university is less deserving of an investment than a student who goes to another university. Like, just wrap your brain around that for a second. It's weird. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, right? Because, hey, NJIT, like engineering, it's expensive. I get that, right? So, okay, a premium for engineering, fine. But a Rowan student, if you go on a per student basis, David, you can correct, it was like 8,000 per student, right? And ours is around 3. 8,000 is more than 3,000. substantially. So like, somebody explain that to me, how that's okay. And then if you look at the demographics of our student body, you see where I'm going now. Like, so this is how you end up with inequality. And this is how you end up with differences on the basis of race and ethnicity. Doesn't mean that the person who created that policy was racist, but you come up with a policy that has differential outcomes based on the groups that are involved, and that's what that looks like. So we need advocacy, and we need it to be coordinated and, you know, singing from the same hymnal, and appreciate that opportunity is to reach out to your individual legislators. Make the case, and we'll have an op-ed published in the near future that will make this case, and hopefully that will provide some talking points, and we'll go from there. But I very appreciate the sentiment. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Coralie Young. I'm a career advisor at the College of Science and Mathematics. And kind of to go off of what you said about advocacy, one of the populations that we work with is international students. And one of the obstacles that we face with international students is finding employers to work with them and sponsor them. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, first of all, I think we have a huge opportunity to increase the number of international students who come and study with us. I think this is a fabulous environment for access to New York City, right? You know, it's a very welcoming environment, high quality programs, very affordable relative to a lot of other institutions for international students. But as a general matter, and I think you would probably agree with this more than most since you're in it, I think our infrastructure to support international students needs to be dramatically improved. It's something that Provost and I talked about early on, and we want to see a huge upping of our game in terms of the resources and support available for international students. One element of that is definitely employment opportunities post-graduation. That's gotten a lot harder, as you know, because the number of visas that are being issued for international students has gone down dramatically, and this is particularly true, so Dean Hollister could probably speak to it. There was an allowance within the context of educational programs to say, well, you can get a job if it's part of your education. That has scaled back not as dramatically as the permanent work visas. So it's partially a matter of relationships with firms and finding them to sponsor, but it's also how many slots are there in this country right now for those visas. It's a real challenge, and so increasingly students who are coming to this country, I think this is a mistake, by the way, from a public policy point of view, but international students who are coming to studying here then leave because they can't get jobs. They can't get jobs here, and what some universities are getting, and I've read a little bit more about this, I haven't been involved in it, they're starting to work on placements in home countries, which is an interesting new thing in higher ed, that we would actually be in the business of getting people jobs where they came from before they studied with us. My hope is that this will alter when we have, as you know, we are in a high or low unemployment environment. Employers are struggling to find people, and so my hope is that some of the resistance to international employment will at least moderate in the years ahead, and then we need to be right there, ready to take those students and place them. But look, in my mind's eye, right, we have a much larger international student population a few years from now, and we have the resources to support them. So thank you for that. Other things? All of a sudden, a flurry right in this neighborhood. Boom.
Hi, my name is Yan Lin, Sun from IT division. So my question is, can you please share a little bit more about Montclair Unbound? Heard a lot of times talk about it, and how Montclair Unbound fits into the institutional strategy plan you just shared.
I will, thank you. So Montclair Unbound I mean it in two ways, right? So on one level, it's a philosophy, or what was the word? An ethos, right? Which is that the way that universities have to interact with students is fundamentally changing, right? There will be some number of students who will come, they'll be on campus for a few years, and they'll earn their degree mostly sitting in classrooms. That will exist. That's part of the higher education landscape. It will be part of the Montclair experience. But an increasing number of students they're not going to learn that way. That's not how they're going to earn a degree. And they don't want the alternative to just be, well, take an online degree. There's a lot of great things you can do online. I came from a university that was one of the leaders in online education. So I know it pretty well, and I know what you can do creatively in an online format. But we also know, having just come through spending a significant portion of our lives, and now forever we'll be spending a significant portion of our lives on Zoom, we also know you can do interesting things with what we would call synchronous distance learning, and it's easier now than ever. And it has a huge number of advantages, especially for people who are working and taking care of kids. And, the idea of getting on Zoom once in a while as opposed to getting in your car and driving and getting a babysitter and finding parking, that's really useful. So I think the future is going to be all of those things mixed together. So some of it's face-to-face, some of it's asynchronous online, some of it's synchronous. And it's not going to be, well, there's an online course and a non-online course. It's going to be even within a course. Some sessions will be face-to-face, some will not. Maybe you're mostly online, and then there's a capstone week at the end, right? And this is going to be, I think, how the vast majority of people want to consume their higher education experience. I think that's particularly true at the graduate level, right? The idea that people are going to pick up their lives and move cross-country and get an MBA for 2 years, yeah. There'll be a small number of programs, people will go to Wharton maybe, but that's going to be a tiny sliver. So we have to embrace this idea that an institution to survive has to be flexible and nimble and find new creative ways to reach students. And that's sort of the ethos of Montclair Unbound. And then it will be, in some sense, a front door and have an organizational footprint that says, okay, this is where you find these flexible hybrid degree opportunities, and we will have some internal capacity to support units that are innovative in this way and want to create these programs, and how do we help you design them, and how do we work on the scheduling, and how do we work on the sort of support for something like that. I mean, I imagine a degree where you are partially online. Maybe you do a gathering on the first weekend of the class. You meet all your classmates, then you all scatter, and then maybe you come back together for a week in June. And you can stay on campus, or we'll get you an apartment, and we'll get you theater tickets, and we'll make a whole experience out of it. We don't have an infrastructure to do that right now. So I think that's what we will end up growing to make that possible. That's where I think the future of higher education is. By the way, and that's how we expand the blue bar. It might end up being a different color, I don't know. But by taking advantage of what we have this amazing, beautiful campus right there across from the city. We've got some potential here that we're not fully tapping into. And so this Unbound idea is about tapping into that potential by meeting learners where they want to be. Yeah. There were go.
Hi, I'm Alexa Chikala, Institutional Research and Effectiveness. I just had a question about the employees, if they want to develop in their fields or area. We used to have learning and development area in human resources, and what are the plans for that?
Yeah, and I think that's something that's really important, and we'll say, David Vernon, who's the Vice President for Human Resources, feels really strongly that that's something that got cut, but we need to restore it, so we're working on putting that back. Even in lean times, I'm a big believer that you do have to give employees an opportunity to grow, and nobody wants to sort of feel like they're static and not gaining new insights, new skills, new knowledge. And so that's what we're going to try and do. I think we need those programs on campus, both in terms of skills, but also leadership opportunities and training opportunities. So it's very much on our minds, and how do we do that? It is like everything else, a resource question, but I think that the university is stronger when people have those opportunities. I know we're over the expected time, so I don't want to hold anybody hostage, but I also want to answer questions.
Hi, Crystal Woolston, Center for Community Engagement. I'm wondering, so lately, I'd probably say over the past maybe 6 months, there have been these online ramblings of students, and ramblings isn't the right word because I think they're actually very valid, about the way that the university handles complaints of sexual harassment and sexual assault on our campus. To the point where students are saying it's not even worth it to go through like Title IX because the institution doesn't respond. I'm sure you've seen them. I'm sure you've heard about them. There was just that article, last week about one of our colleagues.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the university plans on responding. Is the administration talking about ways to address these concerns better so that this doesn't become part of the reputation of Montclair the way that it's seeming like it has been?
Absolutely. So, and, so I've brought it up, my feeling is, first of all, if those students, it's not enough for saying, no, we take it very seriously and that's not good enough, right? Because yes, I take it very seriously personally, but that doesn't mean that our process and the mechanisms that we have in place are not making people feel marginalized and unheard. So we definitely have to address it. And actually, related to the budgeting question, we have to be better at explaining to people what those things are. So there is a built-in problem here, right? Which is that people will complain, and then it's 2022, so they'll bring a complaint to the administration, and it will be investigated. And that can take time and is done confidentially, but that doesn't stop anybody else from going on Instagram or whatever and talking about it. And so now you've got a growing sort of set of people who know about something, are concerned about it. They're given one set of facts, which at best is partial, right? And it seems like nobody's doing anything. And then even as things are happening, people are being interviewed, questions are being asked, facts are being gathered, and even as something may be done of consequence, there's no press release, right? And so there's an information asymmetry that's just built into the dynamic, and there's no way to get around that. Having said that, a lot of these stories talk about discouragement that students have received when they've approached somebody, or feeling dismissed, or things taking a long time, and those are unacceptable. And so we are going to investigate every single one of those things. Whenever there's an article, I send an email saying I want to know what happened in this specific case, and I've said we have to look at our process and reevaluate it, and so that's what we're going to do. Our Title IX process, both as it applies to students, and our HR processes as applies to staff and faculty. It can't be that we create an appearance of, or a reality of, quite frankly, indifference. So that's high on my, on the list of 120 things, right? That's high on my list, is to rectify that and address it, and do a better job of communicating what actually happens when a complaint is registered, because I don't think people fully understand it. But I appreciate that, and yes, it's concerning to me too. Where are we at time-wise? Okay, is in the back, yeah?
Yes, my name is Corliss Sprung. I work in IT. And just in response to what Crystal was talking about, I think I've been here for 20 years, and over the course of 20 years, I've seen the culture change on this campus, more of like an elite kind of structure across the campus. For example, I think the year of the pandemic, 2020, for example, so the faculty and staff were forced to do, they took those furloughs, thank you. Sorry, the brain is not working today. They were forced to take furloughs, but the management did not. And so I think when you have such separate, expectations for a different set of people, also, I've also noticed that in our ServiceNow incident reporting system. So if you have a problem with your computer, right, you call me and I come and I fix it or whatever. In that system itself, there is language that says this person is a VIP versus the other person, what are they? So I think like language is very important, thoughts, words, and actions. And if we are going to foster this kind of elitist kind of culture, how do we get faculty, staff, and management really on board with one another?
Yeah, you're not going to find any disagreement from me. I mean, so first of all, so I want to find out about, I'm looking at at Candy, let's find out what that is. I can't speak to management decisions that have been made in the past, but I do believe as a general matter that there shouldn't be, that this is not Animal Farm, right? There shouldn't be different sets of rules that apply. And look, I mean, that's part of the reason, if you remember, I thought it was when I thought that the vaccine policy needed to apply to everybody, not just to students. So I agree with that as a sense, and it certainly shouldn't be the case if we're linking these two together, that some people feel like they're exempt from these policies or not subject to them. I certainly don't feel like that at all.
Yes, it's very exclusionary.
And I'm completely intolerant of that attitude, to be honest.
And I get it in the sense that, okay, there are some critical areas or critical roles, and okay, so you put that in, you can put that construct in, but don't say VIP.
Yeah, no, I don't care for that. Look, I'm being honest, I don't care for that. Universities are funny, right, in that they have this hierarchy built in. You've got staff, you've got faculty. They are peculiar. They are peculiar entities in that regard, but we should be working against that, not encouraging it. So I agree with that.
Thank you.
I think we have one more, last one. Who's got a really good one? Okay, yeah.
How about making the recreation center available for free for all employees?
Yeah.
I think
I've heard
it
that.
would foster, not only physical health, but mental health and socialization with people outside your area.
I've heard this idea before. Students pay for it with their fees. Just think about that for a second, right? So that's.
They could use it off hours. And
Just
I think
no,
there's a competition in the morning.
But you just have to take that seriously for a second, right? So I think it's a meritorious idea, but not one without implications and not one that doesn't come at a trade-off. So I think it's something that we should look at how to do it in a way that doesn't have negative implications for other constituencies. So I've heard it, and also to think more broadly about how might we create other recreational opportunities in the campus environment that are not necessarily in opposition to other constituencies. So,
And one other suggestion is a trial of a flexible work week, for a 4-day work week. I'm not saying, people working remotely, but people work 4 days, work 4 10-hour days.
Well, we've had that trial for, I don't know how many years have we been doing?
No.
There's summer, there's the summer hours.
But how about you try it for a year?
Maybe. I think we have to look at that. I think that the implications, and we've seen this with remote work, right? The implications of these changes from a management point of view and a service provision point of view, I think we have to understand them, right? In terms of our ability to provide the services that are expected. Right, because the services that are expected, I asked this question, I just sent an email on the summer hours. The services that are expected, the expectations aren't 4 days a week, because we haven't gone to a 4-day-a-week world, right? So now maybe we should, but we haven't, and so I think we have to ask the question: do all these changes? Yes, they're convenient for the employee, but does it inhibit our ability to serve our constituents? I mean, that is the bottom line. And, we do exist. And by the way, we exist for that reason, right? That people are willing to pay to come here, and they have a certain level of expectations that our priority is serving them. The university exists The university exists for the students, right? It doesn't exist for the faculty. It doesn't exist for the staff. It doesn't exist for me. It exists for them. So yes, we should look at those things, but the question has to be, can we do it in such a way that doesn't have negative consequences? And not everybody can access services on certain days of the week. Well, we can have a conversation. I mean, we're way over, but yeah.
We're open 5 days a week, 8 to 5:30. So we actually provide more service hours.
Yeah, but a policy is not just your unit, right? So the question is, can you do it as a university policy? I raised the question, even in terms of the summer, why does it have to be Friday? Why wouldn't some people be summer Friday and some people are summer Monday? Right? That to me would be a more sensible thing to think about, or at least to explore. And so it could be that you could do something like that. But this is, again, you're starting to get sort of ninja level management. So now you've got who's working remotely, who's working 10 hours this day, who's doing this. I mean, to build the management systems to do that that's not small. I'm
not
suggesting
a remote. I'm just saying be in person.
I understand, but so you're getting rid of remote work?
Yeah.
Who wants
we are. We have no remote work in our office.
I understand, but the problem is all of these things hang together, right? So if you're going to have, if we let the tribe vote on that,
well,
you lose.
Well,
so
for us, it's a better service
I understand.
for the graduate students.
Look,
and the students
the nature of work in America and the world is going to change, right? And so this is very much, it's the extension of the unbound response, right? So people expect to have their work unbound, and they want to work on their own schedule, and they want to come to work when they want to come to work and not come to work when they don't want to come to work. And I want a 10-hour day, and okay. Some people would like to work, no, I think it should be that I work, 10 days on and 6 days off. That's what I want. And it's like, okay, but, this is not Burger King. You can't have it your way. Anyway, thank you very much.